this was setting up to be a bit of an awkward Sunday. And that's before the snowfall this morning made it start to look a lot more like Christmas than a week after Halloween. But it was beginning to look like an awkward Sunday because here we are on Pledge Sunday. This is the culmination of the last month of the stewardship messages where we've been asking you to commit your financial resources to support this community. And we're gathered here in worship, and we're playing beautiful music and saying prayers. And what did we hear from the prophet Amos this morning? I despise your festivals. Take away from me the noise of your songs. Yeah, that doesn't sound too great, does it? You know, these verses don't get preached in very many churches in this country very often. And if we're going to try to tackle this, it's on Pledge Sunday? I mean, that's perfect timing, right? I mean, when we first looked at the dates for this, when Tricia and I were working on stewardship season, looking at the dates, I had that on one window of my computer, and then on the other half of it, I had the narrative lectionary with the different scripture passages that we're going through, and I'm kind of lining them up and go, okay, oh no. And I actually called Tricia in a little bit of a panic. I try not to panic too much, but maybe a little bit of a panic, saying, Tricia, just listen to these verses. And look at this is how we're planning on ending our stewardship season. And we brainstormed different options, but we didn't switch anything. And so here we are. And as in preparation for this morning, I actually think Amos is the perfect message for what we need to hear today. Not to scold us, but to help open our eyes to something beautiful that's already happening that we might otherwise be able to miss with some of the noise in the world. Amos is going to help us understand what good looks like. But first, let's start with Amos because it's an important part of the story to get the context here. Amos was not born and raised. He was not a professional prophet. He was a shepherd from a small town in the Judean hill country, not in Israel, but from their neighbor. He was an outside voice. And as a shepherd, as we know, God likes shepherds. If you don't want to be a prophet, don't be a shepherd. Because shepherds often get called to do some really hard work. But he was called. And he had these visions about the northern kingdom of Israel and about the injustice that was happening. And in chapter 5 in our reading today, we hear God's frustrations with their worship, saying, I despise your festivals. I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. And we need to be clear, these weren't pagan festivals. It's not that they were worshiping wrong. They were worshiping right, at least in a sense. These were God's festivals. There was the worship gatherings that God had commanded. The sacrifices were prescribed in the Torah. The songs were from the Psalms. Theologically, it was correct. It was orthodox. Yet all of this was despised by God. Why? Because as we find out in Amos, if we keep reading, because Israel had mastered something dangerous. They had mastered the practice of separating worship from the rest of the week. Sabbath was over here, 6 days is over here. We can sing beautiful songs on this day, and we can ignore our neighbors in need on these days. We can make burnt offerings on these days, and we can make deals that hurt the poor on these days. We can have this high production, high value worship, and we can live with corrupt hearts. That's why God says through Amos, take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. God calls their worship noise. Noise. Which I have to admit, if you've ever heard me accidentally leave my mic on as a hymn starts, you may have heard some of that noise that can be distracting. That's not on purpose. I call it an accidental solo. But that's not what we're talking about here. God's not talking about the quality of music. God's talking about the authenticity of worship. And as Christians today, that should really grab our attention in a world that can be a whirlwind. So we have these harsh words coming from the prophet. But we need to remember that prophets are not about scolding and then running away. Prophets are about calling for repentance. Prophets are always about inviting us to turn around and to live a different way. And Amos tells us, as he told ancient Israel, how to do that. Seek good and not evil, that you may live. Hate evil and love good, and establish justice in the gates. Seek good. It's not just about avoiding evil. It's not about sitting home and saying, well, I'm not a part of the problem. It's not just about maintaining religious observance. I'm doing the Sabbath. It's about actively, intentionally seeking good with our whole life, the Sabbath and all the other days of the week. Now, when Amos says, in the gate, this needs a little translation for us. I think a better translation might be town square to help get us in that mindset. In the gate, that's the place where business happened, where courts, think legal courts, convened, where community decisions were made. It was the town hall, it was the courthouse, it was the city council, it was the marketplace, all rolled into one. It was where justice either happened or didn't happen. So when Amos says, establish justice in the gate, he's saying, instill good in your structures, in your institutions, in the systems where power operates. They need to be focused on doing good. Jesus said it this way in Matthew 25. I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. When we seek good, when we feed, welcome, and care, Jesus says we're actually encountering him. This is what Amos is pointing to, and that is what Jesus embodies. And then going back to Amos in verse 24 gives us one of Scripture's most beautiful, most powerful images. Perhaps if you're like me, it evokes images also of Martin Luther King Jr. in front of the Lincoln Memorial, saying, let justice roll down like waters, and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. So with this groundwork kind of laid, the question that I've been coming back to when it's seek good, hate evil, it's for us today, 3,000 plus years later, what does good actually look like? We can hear seek good and go, great. How do we do that? I suspect at least some of you have probably heard or perhaps even seen the massive Netflix hit movie from a couple months ago, K-pop Demon Hunters. Have we heard of this? This group has, I promise you. So it's an animated, music-heavy movie, and if some of you are thinking, did my pastor just reference a cartoon about demon-fighting Korean pop stars in a sermon about ancient prophecy? Yes, I just did. In my defense, I'm a dad with 2 kids, and it is all the rage for that age range. And I had to hear those songs a lot these last few months, but bear with me here. As the movie became the most watched film in Netflix history, and as the entire soundtrack was dominating top 10 charts for around the world, there's one song that was my favorite. This is what it sounds like. It comes near the very end of the movie. It's the climax. I'll try not to spoil too much, but what's essentially saying is, pay attention. When we are authentic to ourselves, this is what it sounds like. I want to do something similar this morning. I want to say pay attention because this is what good looks like. This is what it sounds like when justice starts to roll. This is what happens when worship flows into action in the world. So the question this morning is, what does good look like? Good looks like children in the neighborhood, showing up for summer camp and discovering in a church building that they are loved just as they are. That they matter just as they are. That adults who don't know them, who don't have to legally care for them, still care for them, just as they are. Good looks like kids from the neighborhood experiencing joy and safety and belonging right here in this building. This is what good looks like. Good looks like families who are experiencing grief, walking through the doors under the portico share Tuesday night and Monday night, with the sign to the side saying Buddy's Place. And finding not just resources, but community. Not just services, but dignity and hope. Good looks like neighbors being treated like neighbors, not files or cases to be managed. This is what good looks like. Good looks like people who have family members struggling with addiction and its rippling effects through their families, finding healing and support through Al-Anon groups that meet here every single week. Good looks like our building becoming a safe space where people can be honest about their pain and find support for the recovery. This is what good looks like. Good looks like families receiving food from our food pantry partners and really knowing that they are not alone in their struggle. And right now, with the shutdown that we all know about and with food assistance programs not coming through, this work is more critical than ever. People who were counting on help that isn't arriving are now showing up needing more. And partnering with others, we are there for them. Good looks like the simple yet profound act of feeding people who are hungry. This is what good looks like. You know, we've been intentional, especially over these last couple years, about seeking out partnerships in our community, organizations that are doing good work and saying, how can we help and support you? And this afternoon, we are hosting here as in downstairs in the Jones Room, but we're hosting in our building, the Acceptance for All Family Book Club. This is a group of parents who started out primarily from Western Springs and now kind of beyond as we're growing, who have come together to have tough conversations with their children, often elementary school aged, right there in the room. Questions about race or belonging or different ability, and about how we raise our children to be able to see and just love all people. As one of the founders put it, it starts with bravery and vulnerability. It started with a group of Forest Hill moms on a porch, sharing pain and looking for support. And today, we're having about 50 of us meet here, using this space to continue building understanding and acceptance. This is what good looks like. Good looks like this place being a connection point for our community. A place where light and joy and hope break through in a world that so often feels dark and overwhelming. A place where people doing good work can gather and grow. This is what good looks like. You probably heard that a couple weeks ago, or many of you here I know were there at Margaret's Village in our workday. Margaret's Village provides transitional housing for homeless women, children, and families in Chicago. They have 2 shelters, one in Inglewood and one South Chicago, providing about 100 beds of interim housing and comprehensive support services. Their mission is to provide experiences that empower, mentor, and support women and the broader community so they can achieve their highest potential. We've been partnering with them for a long, long time. And a couple weeks ago when we were on the work day, I was assigned paint duty, which means we don't want you to cut off any fingers with power tools. But I was on paint duty, and we were rolling paint, and we had the brushes. We were painting this inside hallway, like the main hallway when you come into the building, where there were some offices and rooms and stuff there. And as we were painting, there were 3 kids who were living at Margaret's Village who came up to me and asked if they could help paint. And I asked them how old they were, and the three of them were between ages 6 and 10. Now, if you have kids between the ages of 6 and 10, and I have 2 of them, and they ask for paint, you know this can go one of 2 ways, right? But for this moment, this was their home. They saw us helping, and they wanted to be a part of it. So I got them a brush. And it wasn't long until they had this beautiful light lavender paint all over their hands. One had it up their arms, and I don't know how the other got it on his face, but he did. But they were also painting and laughing and sharing the joy and hope. That was the whole point of why we were there and why they exist, the organization. The kids weren't there to be recipients of charity. They were wanting to be participants in restoration. They picked up brushes and were painting and asking questions and laughing as the paint got on them or their sibling. That's what Amos is talking about. That's justice being established. Looking at supporting and doing good in communities where dignity is restored, where people aren't just housed or put away, but empowered. Where children see themselves not as problems to be solved, but as partners in doing good. This is what good looks like. And when we speak and use the language of justice that rolls down like waters, it requires infrastructure. It requires sustained sources. It requires tributaries feeding into the mainstream. That's what it means to establish justice in the gate. It's to make it a core bedrock of society. As one church, we're not the river, but we can be a tributary. We can help feed into that stream. We can't fix the world, but we have a part to play here. And your offerings of your time, your talents, and your treasure, and the pledges here on Pledge Sunday, help create that infrastructure here that allows good to keep flowing. The pledges that go to the building and the lights staying on, let the summer camp happen, give Buddy's Place a place to meet, let Al-Anon gather, give Acceptance for All, gives all of these groups a warm, safe, and dry place to form community. The pledges that fund ministries that make this community a connection point for light and hope. And it's important for us to be able to say, as we hear these prophets, that we do not want to put our resources and will not put them into funding empty ritual. We're not here to keep religious machinery running and running and running. We're here to invest in the infrastructure that allows justice to roll. We're here to make it possible for good work to happen, for us to do it directly and for us to partner with all the others that are doing good work right now, and for us to open our doors and be that safe place for those who need it. This is what good costs, and it's worth it. And we are all part of this. But to borrow language from Paul, that doesn't mean that we're all the same part. And this is an important message to stay in this stewardship season. Looking to Paul in Corinthians, Paul writes that we're different parts of the same body, but we are different parts. And I think it's important that we note and that it's said from here that financially, some of us looking ahead to this year can give more. Some of us have to give less. Some of us have more time to offer than dollars. Some of us bring different gifts. But throughout all of the differences, it's not about comparing ourselves to one another. It's ways we can use it all to join together. And your pledge, whatever the amount, is your part in this shared work. Whether the pledge is $50 or $5,000, they're both acts of faithfulness when it's giving in a response to what God is calling us to give. And we need every part of the body to let justice roll. We need each other. It's not about guilt. It's not about obligation. It's about asking ourselves, What is God calling me to offer so that we together can keep doing good? So I ask you to pledge because you've seen what good looks like and because you want to keep the good flowing. Pledge because you believe in this community, as imperfect as we are, that we can be a part of keeping justice rolling down. Pledge because you want worship that isn't noise. Because you want songs that lead to service. Because you want gatherings that overflow into generosity. This is what Jesus meant when he said, "Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." We put our treasure into seeking good, and our hearts are following. And Jesus says that's exactly where the kingdom of God shows up. In communities where worship and justice flow together. What I see in this congregation, I know I've only been here a few years, is that we have a long history of being a part of that river. That we have a long history of faithfulness, of making good flow in this corner of God's world. And we testify that this is what good looks like. And we have a history of living it and seeking it, and we want to keep that going. We want to keep moving forward. Whatever the amount, whatever the capacity, we are all different parts of the same body, but in that we have the same calling. To seek good, to hate evil, to let justice roll down like waters. For this is what good looks like. Let's do it together.